This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
Imagine a piece of cloth, maybe even touched Jesus Christ. That's the power of the Shroud of Turin. It's captivating, Centuries people have been looking at this image of a man, and some believe it's Jesus himself. But is it really from the time of Christ? Or is it a fake, like made centuries later? That's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, what's so fascinating is we only know about the shroud from 1354 in France. Before that, it's a total mystery.
So we're starting already in the dark, huh? So for those of us who haven't seen it, what's it actually look like?
Well, picture this. A linen cloth about 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, with the image of a man, well, a faint image, front and back. And he looks like he's been crucified. You can see wounds on his wrists, his feet. There are even marks that, well, they look like they're from a Roman flagrum. That's a type of whip they used for scourging.
Wow, that's a pretty intense image to think about. And then there's that thing about, wasn't the image clearer in a photographic negative?
Oh, you're right. Way back in 1898, they took the first photograph of the shroud. And in the negative, the image was way clearer, way more defined than what you see on the cloth itself. Like, a hidden layer suddenly appeared.
This is where things get interesting for me. In 1988, scientists were like, let's settle this. So they did this radiocarbon dating on the shroud. And the result, they dated it to, get this, between 1260 and 1390. That makes it medieval, right? End of story.
Well, not quite. That dating made news everywhere, but some researchers, they really disagree with those results. You see, some scientists say the results could be wrong because of contamination from, fire damage and water stains. Remember, the shroud went through a bad fire in 1532.
Right, so the debate goes on, but the image itself, how is it made?
That's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. Researchers have been trying to figure it out for decades. There was this project, the Shroud of Turin research project. They call it STURP. They did all sorts of analysis on the shroud back in the 70s. You know what they found? The big thing. The image wasn't made with any kind of pigments or paints. They even ruled out dyes and stains. No scorching or anything like that.
So what then? If it's not paint or dye?
That's what makes this thing so intriguing. There are theories, of course. Some say it's natural chemical reactions, maybe involving the linen, body fluids, things they used in burials. Other theories, well, they get a little more unusual, like radiation bursts, things like that.
Wait, radiation? Are we talking supernatural?
Well, some people who believe the shroud is real, that's what they propose. There's even a theory about, a burst of ultraviolet radiation creating the image. But scientifically, no solid evidence for that yet.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a mysterious image. Science can't figure out how it was made, the dates don't really add up, and people are coming up with all kinds of theories. I am hooked. So, what other clues are there that point to the shroud being, from the time of Jesus?
Oh, this is where it gets complicated. See, those who believe the shroud is real, they point to a few key things. First, pollen. They found pollen grains on the shroud, and they match plants from a very specific place, in Judea, near Jerusalem. So it suggests the shroud was there, in the region where Jesus lived.
Wow, so it's not just it's from the Middle East. It's from a very specific spot. That's a much stronger connection. What else?
Then there are the bloodstains. They line up with wounds that you'd see with crucifixion. And get this, the blood type. They say it's AB. That's a pretty rare blood type. But here's the mind-blowing part. AB is also the blood type found on the sudarium of Oviedo.
The sudarium of Oviedo, what's that?
It's another relic. People believe it was the burial cloth, but for Jesus's face. Some researchers think the bloodstains on it could be connected to the Shroud of Turin.
Okay, now I see how the pieces might fit together. Pollen, blood type, what else?
Well, some experts say the way the cloth is woven, the weave, it matches textiles from the 1st century. And if you look at the image really closely, the details, things like the nails, they're in the wrists, not the palms. That matches Roman crucifixion, not how they showed it in medieval art.
So even the smallest things could be clues. But I bet those who think the shroud is a fake have their own ideas about all this.
Oh, of course. They say you can interpret all those points in different ways. The pollen, they say it could have gotten there much later. And the blood type, sure, it's rare, but that doesn't automatically prove the shroud is real. They say a really, really good artist, back in medieval times, could have made a fake that looked just like this.
So it was all a big con.
Maybe. It's a possibility we can't ignore. But remember, just because we haven't found solid proof about how it started, where it came from, doesn't mean that proof isn't out there. Maybe we just haven't found it yet.
Okay, so we've got this back and forth, evidence for both sides. So where does that leave us?
Right in the middle of a very captivating mystery. The Shroud of Turin is like a puzzle where the pieces seem to fit together in all sorts of ways. Depends how you look at it.
So you have to look at the evidence and make up your own mind.
Right.
But before we get into the really out there stuff, let's switch gears for a second. What are the best arguments for it being from medieval times?
The biggest argument against the shroud being real is that there's no record of it before the 14th century. If it really was the burial cloth of Jesus, shouldn't we have heard about it? I mean, for over 1,300 years?
That's a good question. What do the skeptics say?
They say that it's suddenly showing up in France in the 14th century. Well, that was when religious relics were super popular. Maybe someone made the shroud to, cash in on that. And remember, Stirp, they couldn't figure out how the image was made. But they didn't rule out the possibility of an artist, maybe using some technique nobody knew about back then.
So, like a really fancy medieval trick?
Yeah, it's possible.
We can't ignore that. Okay, so we've gone through a lot. The history, the evidence, is it real or not? But there's something else, something we haven't even touched on. The stuff science just can't explain.
True. We've been looking at, when it was made, how it was made. But this thing, it just has these weird parts.
Exactly. It's not just what you see. The details.
Yeah.
There's something more to this image than we can even see with our eyes.
Well, you're talking about those 3D properties, right?
Yeah. It's not just a flat picture on a cloth. It has depth, contours like a map. But of the body, how is that even possible?
It's one of the most baffling things about it, no doubt. The image, how dark or light it is, it changes. And it seems to, match how far the body was from the cloth. That 3D thing, it's so unique. Nobody's ever copied it in a fake.
This is where it gets really, really strange. So we have this detailed image, maybe made in some way we don't know, and it's got this weird 3D thing going on. So what are the theories? How do people explain this?
Oh, there's a whole range of theories, from things that make scientific sense to, the more supernatural ideas. On the, let's say, grounded side, some researchers think it was natural chemical reactions. The body, wrapped in the linen, it releases stuff as it decomposes, and those things react with the cloth over time, maybe faster because of humidity, heat, and eventually, boom, you get this faint image.
So like some ancient version of photography, but accidental?
Yeah, sort of like that. But then you have the more faith-based theories, I guess you could say.
Right, because for people who believe in the shroud, it's not just some random chemical accident, right?
Right. For them, the image, it's a miracle, something created, divinely. Some say it was a burst of energy when Christ resurrected. That's not really something you can test with science, but it means a lot to people who see the shroud as this holy relic.
It's definitely a theory that gets you thinking.
Yeah.
But even if we forget about the supernatural stuff, science still doesn't know for sure how the image was made.
That's the thing, we just don't know. Even after decades of research, all this analysis.
You mentioned X-rays, ultraviolet light, all that stuff. Can you break it down for our listener? What were scientists hoping to find?
Sure. Scientists, they use all sorts of techniques to study old stuff. X-rays, for example, they let you see through layers. You can see structures underneath or details that are hidden, invisible to the naked eye. With the shroud, they use X-rays to look at the weave of the fabric, how the image is spread out, were there any pigments, any paint. Then there's ultraviolet light, which makes some things like glow. They call it fluoresce. It helps identify stuff like organic materials, some dyes, even repairs made to the cloth over time.
So what do they find with all that? Anything that explains the image?
They learned a lot about the cloth, the image. X-rays showed the image isn't just on the cloth, it goes into the fibers a certain depth. That's weird because if you paint or stain something, it usually just stays on the surface. And with ultraviolet, they didn't find any pigments, any dyes, more evidence that it wasn't made in the usual artistic ways.
That's wild. Like the image is part of the cloth itself.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And that's one reason there's been so much debate, speculation, all these years.
So it's not just the image, it's how it got there. And the fact that it exists in a way that science can't explain. This is mind-blowing.
And we haven't even talked about the chemical analysis they did. They found traces of things, blood, pollen, even aloes and myrrh. Those were used in ancient burials.
Hold on, aloes and myrrh, isn't that in the Bible? When they buried Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. That just adds another layer to the whole shroud story. Makes you wonder, was this cloth in contact with a body that was prepared for burial like they did back then?
Wow, things just keep getting more interesting. So we've got an image science can't figure out, dates all over the place, and now substances that line up with the Bible.
And every piece of the puzzle seems to lead to more questions. That's what keeps the Shroud at the center of all these debates, scientific, religious, everything.
It really is a mystery wrapped in linen, isn't it? But what does it all mean for us, the people trying to make sense of it?
That's the beauty of it, don't you think? The Shroud makes us look at what we know, what we think we know. It's about faith, science, history, big questions. It makes us consider different ideas, look at the evidence, and in the end, decide for ourselves what we believe.
It shows us that even now, with all our technology, some mysteries are just too big to solve.
Exactly. The Shroud isn't just cloth, it's like a mirror showing us our own beliefs, our curiosity, and how we're drawn to the unknown. It's a story that keeps going with every new discovery, every new analysis, and in a way, the story is still being written.
So science, history, real or fake? Where do we end up with this Shroud of Turin? Is it the real deal from Jesus' time, a clever fake from the Middle Ages? Or something else, something we haven't even thought of?
Well, after looking at all the evidence, I think, honestly, we still don't know, and that's what makes it so interesting, isn't it? It's a puzzle that just won't be solved. It makes us keep searching, keep wondering, keep our minds open.
Like it's asking us, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly. It makes us question what we think is true. It pushes the limits of what we understand. It's about science, faith, and where they meet, where they clash. We can look at the threads, the image, all of it. But in the end, it's like the Shroud is showing us our own beliefs, how we interpret things.
We've talked about all this evidence, but maybe the real point isn't the Shroud itself. Maybe it's about what it means to each of us.
That's a good point. For some people, it represents their faith, a connection to something they believe in. For others, it's this scientific mystery to solve. And for a lot of people, it's just fascinating, this mystery that makes us think about history, science, and why we believe what we believe.
Maybe those questions are more important than finding the answers. The Shroud gets people talking. It makes us think critically, and it gets us to really engage with history, science, and spirituality in a way that, I don't know, most things don't.
Definitely. It reminds us that learning is a journey, not just an endpoint. Even today, with all our technology, all the progress, some mysteries, well, we just can't explain them, and that's okay.
So what's the one thing, the big takeaway, you want our listener to have from this deep dive into the Shroud of Turin?
Let me ask you this. Imagine we had technology, super advanced, and it could tell us 100% whether the Shroud was real or fake. Would you want to know? Or is the mystery, not knowing, part of what makes it so powerful?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. The Shroud of Turin shows us that sometimes the most interesting questions are the ones we don't have clear answers for. It makes us explore, question things, and stay open-minded. So whether you believe it's a holy relic or just a really old puzzle, it still fascinates us, inspires us, and makes us think, even after all these centuries.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new way to look at this enduring mystery. Now it's your turn. What do you believe?
Thanks for joining us on this amazing journey. We'll be back next time for another deep dive into the world's most interesting topics.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.